Ooh.
And where does he go from here? This is an existential crisis for Harry. And I thought his reaction afterwards with the angry response to the verdict, which strangely Doreen Lawrence was a co-signatory of, but if you read the text and if you read lines like total whitewash, that doesn't sound like Doreen Lawrence to me. Sounds like Harry. So I think what's happened, guys, is that he sued in anger. You should never sue someone when you're angry. You got to have cool heads, calm, rational arguments, and it's always a risk. Instead, he's gone in like a bull in the china shop.
The clock is ticking, the courtroom doors have closed, and behind the scenes, a financial storm is reportedly growing around Prince Harry because the promise that protected one claimant may have opened an even bigger crisis for everyone left behind. The $18.3 million question hanging over this case is no longer just about a legal bill. It is about who is willing to stand beside Harry when the numbers become impossible to ignore. The biggest twist in this entire legal battle is that Baroness Doreen Lawrence's position appears to have been secured. Harry made a very public promise that she would not be left carrying the financial consequences, and that promise became reality. She is protected. But now comes the part that has created the real pressure. The money did not disappear. The responsibility did not disappear. The shortfall simply moved. And suddenly, the spotlight turned toward the remaining claimants, including Prince Harry himself. The figures being discussed have created a financial nightmare. The claimant's insurance reportedly covers around $2 million, while Associated Newspapers claimed costs are around $34.5 million. That leaves a potential gap of more than $18 million.
Daily Mail could get millions in damages. Can Harry afford it? Will he have to sell the mansion?
Now, publishers of the Daily Mail argue that the claimant, Harry, and his team and their legal team handled the case in such an exceptionally improper manner that the court should require them to pay costs on an indemnity basis.
And while the final amount has not been decided, the fear surrounding that number has become the biggest storyline coming out of the courtroom, because Judge Nicklin did not reveal the final bill. He did not announce what each person owes. Instead, judgment was reserved with a written decision expected on the cost issue. But one thing was made clear: an interim payment deadline is coming, August 28th. That date is now hanging over the entire group. And according to the courtroom arguments, the battle is not just about losing a case. It is about whether the court believes the claimants should face the harsher indemnity cost basis, a decision that could dramatically increase the financial pressure. This is where the controversy explodes, because behind the legal language is a much more personal question. Who actually steps forward when the bill arrives? For months, Harry's supporters have focused on the promise he made to protect Baroness Lawrence, but critics now argue that protecting one person may have intensified the pressure on the remaining names. The calculation has changed. 7 claimants became 6, and among those 6, Harry remains the person attracting the most attention. Why? Because this is not just a court bill. It is a public relations crisis. Every move Harry makes is being examined, every statement is being analyzed, every financial decision is becoming part of a much bigger royal drama. And then came the whispers about private funding discussions. According to the claims circulating around the controversy, expectations were growing that some of the wealthier figures connected to the case could help ease the pressure. Names like Sir Elton John immediately became part of the conversation because of his long friendship with Harry and his significant financial success. But the silence became louder than any statement. The question being asked was simple: if this group entered the courtroom together, will they leave carrying the burden together? Or will Harry find himself facing the biggest share of public pressure alone? The situation became even more complicated after Harry's post-verdict response. His strong criticism of the outcome became part of the legal argument from the opposing side, with lawyers suggesting that his public statements continued allegations after the judgment. That created a second battle. Not only was Harry fighting over money, he was fighting over perception. Was this a principled stand that ended badly, or was this a legal gamble that created a financial disaster? That debate is now dominating the aftermath, and while the final ruling is still pending, the atmosphere around the case has changed dramatically. The promise held. Baroness Lawrence was protected, but the pressure did not disappear. It moved directly toward the remaining claimants, and especially toward the man who made the promise in the first place. Because when the deadline arrives, the world will not simply ask how much money is owed. The world will ask who stayed, who contributed, and who stepped away when the biggest bill arrived. For Harry, the next few weeks may be the most uncomfortable part of this entire legal battle, because the courtroom fight may be over, but the financial fallout is only beginning. The next chapter of this financial battle is now becoming even more intense, because the biggest unanswered question is no longer whether there will be consequences, but how those consequences will be shared. Behind the scenes, attention has shifted toward whether the remaining claimants can present a united front before the August 28th deadline arrives, or whether the pressure created by the legal costs will expose disagreements that have remained hidden throughout this entire dispute. The courtroom arguments revealed a complicated reality. The insurance protection available to the claimants may not fully cover the amount being demanded, and even if the final figure changes after the written judgment, the possibility of a significant shortfall remains the central concern. Judge Nicklin has not yet delivered the final decision, meaning nobody publicly knows the exact amount that will have to be paid. But the uncertainty itself has created another layer of pressure. For Harry, the situation is especially uncomfortable because the promise made to protect Baroness Doreen Lawrence placed him directly at the center of the responsibility debate. Supporters argue that he kept his word and ensured that someone who had joined the case after being approached by him would not face financial damage. Critics, however, are focusing on what happened afterward, the fact that the remaining burden did not disappear, but instead moved toward the other names still connected to the case. And this is where the private funding questions began creating headlines. The attention naturally turned toward the wealthier members of the group, especially Sir Elton John and those closely connected to him. Alongside David Furnish, Sadie Frost, Elizabeth Hurley, and Simon Hughes, the remaining claimants suddenly found themselves connected to a financial issue much larger than the original legal dispute. The question being whispered about is whether everyone involved was prepared for the possibility of such a massive financial consequence. The opposing argument from Anthony YKC added even more controversy when the case strategy itself came under scrutiny. The phrase used in court describing the proceedings as a banquet of litigation became one of the most repeated moments from the hearing because it transformed the discussion from a simple lost case into a debate about how the entire action was approached. Meanwhile, Nicholas Bacon KC argued that the cost demands being presented were excessive and highlighted the spending issues raised during the hearing. That created a strange situation where both sides were challenging the other side's numbers, leaving the final outcome entirely dependent on Judge Nicklin's written ruling. But beyond the legal arguments, the emotional impact is becoming impossible to ignore. For Meghan, the fallout surrounding Harry's financial pressure has reportedly become another difficult chapter connected to the public battles that have followed their departure from royal life. The attention has once again moved toward money, reputation, and whether the decisions made over the past several years are now creating consequences they never expected. The final ruling will determine the actual financial responsibility. But until then, every silence, every statement, and every public appearance will be examined for clues about what happens next. The promise to protect Baroness Doreen Lawrence may have been fulfilled, but the larger crisis remains unresolved. The deadline is approaching, the final number is still unknown, and the question that continues to dominate the conversation is whether Harry will have the support he expected when the full financial reality finally arrives.